Good morning, everybody. My name is Mr. Hunter, and today I'm going to take you through the writing assignment that was posted today. So this is the Social 10-2. So remember, if you're in Dash 2, this is your writing assignment. The first writing assignment that the Dash 2s get to write is actually more terminology and vocabulary type work, and which makes it pretty straightforward because a lot of those definitions are in the notes and also in your textbook. So whenever you're doing this type of writing assignment, you want to focus on this main question. Okay, so it'll be right listed below the word puzzle, and it'll say which terms are the most important to historical globalization. Now, this, of course, is the key word here, is historical globalization. And when you answer this type of writing assignment, it's always going to focus on some sort of main topic or main concept. Okay, so in this case, it's historical globalization, which means that when you're talking about this unit, it's everything from the start of the Silk Road right through until what you guys did before spring break. And so there's a lot of different information there. There's lots of material, and you're going to focus on what do you think is the most important to historical globalization. Okay, so whenever you see these assignments, they'll have a whole bunch of collection of words, and you're basically trying to pick out of those words and out of the terms that are listed above, what are the most important. Now you'll also see it says terms, and what that means is ideally what you want to do is choose 1 to 3. I always recommend my students go for 3, and that's just because it gives you a little bit more to write about in terms of content. However, it does make the assignment a little longer. Now, a lot of you guys, this is probably your first crack at formal writing, and a lot of these writing assignments are modeled exactly what you'll see on the Social 30-2 diploma. And so if it's your first time doing this, don't be afraid. You can choose 1, you can choose 2, you can choose 3, you can choose pretty much any one of these. I always say to cap it at 3, and you want to write a little bit more than 1 just because if you don't explain it really well or your examples aren't crystal clear, then your mark is going to suffer a little bit. So you can be the judge if it's your first time. Again, we're marking all of these online from home, so we're going to basically just give it your best shot. So before we move on to looking at the assignment itself, what we're going to try to do is focus on the rubric. Okay, so I'm just going to switch to the rubric, and this will be included in the post as well. So there's just a couple things I want to highlight. So when you look at your rubric, total is out of 10, and you get 8 marks for explanations and support, and 2 marks for communication. Okay, so when we're looking at explanations and support, what I always recommend to students is explain it first. So tell me what the term is, and then include support. Okay, so support is like an example or a case study or something from social studies that we learned that you want to use as a way of explaining one of the terms. Okay, and how you're marked is, of course, excellent, proficient, satisfactory, limited, poor, insufficient. Basically, if you basically tell me what the term is in your own terms and maybe you don't provide an example, you're probably looking at around a satisfactory. But if you explain it with a definition and include a case study where it's used, then you're looking at excellent or proficient. Okay, so our explanation is comprehensive. Are they deliberate? Okay, so really, really specific understanding, including an example that's really awesome, that fits really well, then you're probably looking at an excellent. Okay, the difference between an excellent and a proficient is very subtle in the sense that a proficient is where you're introducing the concept, you're explaining it with a good definition, and then maybe your example's not great, but it does work. Okay, so if it's relevant, it's appropriate. And then when we look at a satisfactory, it's general, it's straightforward. Okay, so you're probably looking at a definition like globalization is how the world is connected together. Okay, so what you just said is not wrong, but it could be a little bit more specific. It could be a little bit more precise, but it reveals that you understand what's going on. The last part here is an acceptable understanding of the assigned task is demonstrated. So do you know how to answer these types of questions? Or this writing assignment, do you understand what the task is, and are you able to answer it? That's essentially what this is getting at. Okay, and if you don't understand what's going on, if you have a minimal understanding, maybe you explain something that's totally wrong, it doesn't work, your evidence is all over the place, then you're probably looking at a limited to a poor. Okay, either way though, if you just basically choose one of the definitions or one of the terms that's listed on the word puzzle and you explain it, throw a definition down, use an example, then there's a good chance you're going to get a satisfactory or higher. All right, let's look at communications. So communications is not just spelling. If you can't spell, that's totally fine. As long as you put words or letters together that resemble some of the words. The other thing about this assignment that's nice is that the terms are listed there for you. So some of your larger words that you'll use are actually listed on the assignment itself, which helps with some of your spelling. But when we look at communication, mainly it's about organization, your vocabulary, some of your sentence structure. Okay, so do you have really long run-on sentences? How your grammar, how your mechanics, are you using commas right? That kind of thing. So all of those play into the communication mark, and the communication mark is only out of 2. Okay, so at the excellent level, your vocabulary is very precise. You have a confident control of sentence structure. Your grammar's spot on. And this is kind of cool that if you're on the excellent level, if you do have any errors, it doesn't necessarily mean that your communication is going to suffer. Okay, so even at like 100%, you're still allowed to have a few errors here and there. As long as it doesn't detract from the whole purpose of your writing, then it's totally fine. A lot of the times too, when students are in the communication category, it's really, really hard, unless it's like complete, just like alphabet soup on the page, it's really hard to get a satisfactory or lower than a satisfactory. Okay, so usually you're kind of aiming up for this area. Okay, so just make sure you're using proper sentence structure, you're reading it after you've submitted it, make sure you proofread all of your work, make sure you're spelling words right, and if you don't spell them right, make sure you're looking them up and make those corrections. So all in all, though, the communication mark is only out of 10, which is only about 20% of the total assignment mark. Okay, so pretty easy, pretty straightforward, pretty attainable. And now let's go back and I'll walk you through essentially how to do it. So whenever you're looking at social writing assignments, especially this one, the bullet points are going to lead you home. Okay, so if I look at my bullet points here, it says identify, explain, and support. So for every single one of these terms, the ones that you have chosen, remember, you only choose 1 to 3, and you're going to identify which ones are the most important. Okay, so I'm just going to like pretend this is my page over here. This is my document that I'm going to submit. So first things first, I'm going to identify. So I'm going to say blank, blank, and blank, because I'm going to choose 3. Okay, have I identified? Yes. Now explain. So explain is, of course, just like a definition. So I'm going to start with my first term, and then I'm going to write my definition. Sorry, guys, my penmanship is going to be pretty awful. I'm still getting used to it. Okay, so then I'm going to do that for each one. Okay, so these would essentially be separate paragraphs. Okay, so if I'm typing, I'm going to have my definition and my explanation. Ooh, heavens. Okay, so I'm going to basically say, okay, here's the term, here's essentially what it means, here's a definition, and then we move on to the last bullet point, which is support. Okay, so supporting is basically giving you different examples or different case studies or things that we've talked about in social studies that will help reinforce that understanding. So show us that you know what we're talking about. Okay, so for example, if you chose Indigenous people and you said they are the most important part to historical globalization, the example part would be things like residential school systems, Aboriginal studies in, the scramble for Africa, or, looking at all of those different case studies that we've talked about in this course where Indigenous people were linked back to globalization. Okay, so in terms of my sentence or my paragraph structure, I would then be looking at creating an example or supplying some sort of case study from social studies that helps explain that. Okay, and so this formula is basically how all of these other paragraphs are going to look. Okay, and so basically by the time you're done, you're going to end up with just like a little bit of intro at the top, just saying which ones are the most important. Okay, so maybe a sentence, maybe two at the top. Then you're going to have a traditional 3 paragraphs. If you've chosen 3 terms, again, if you're choosing one, you're going to have just that part. Or if you chose 2, you're going to have just that part. But essentially, this is kind of the formula. So start with an intro, list the terms that you think are the most important, that answers the central question, which terms are the most important in historical globalization, and then you're going to choose your definition and explanation, and then you're going to supply it with an example. Okay, and then once you're finally finished, make sure you proofread. Okay, so give it a quick read, give it a quick look through, make sure that you're using the correct terminology, make sure you don't have any spelling errors or anything like that, and finally, make sure you submit it through Google Classroom. Okay, so I'm going to switch colors here, and I'm just going to kind of go through each of the terms up here. Now remember, these are all different terms that I could use. I'm only going to choose 1 to 3. Okay, so let's say I'm doing this at home, and I'm going to say that, well, imperialism was pretty good. Eurocentrism was a big part of it. And then for the last one, I'm going to say nothing represents it better than Scrabble for Africa. Okay, so all of these other ones I'm just going to cross out because I don't think they work as well. And I'm going to focus on the 3 that I chose. Okay, so I actually, in class, I will get my students to actually just circle these and cross the other ones out. And then I'm going to, of course, put them in here. Okay, so I'm going to say the most important parts to historical globalization, or the most important terms, are imperialism, Eurocentrism, and Scrabble for Africa. So I'm going to say imperialism is number 1, Eurocentrism is number 2, and I'm going to say for the 3rd paragraph, I'm going to talk about the Scrabble for Africa. Okay, so first paragraph, I'm going to say imperialism. Imperialism is when one colony or one country in Europe is dominant over another colony, which then subjugates them for resources. A really good example of this would be the imperialism in India case study we talked about in class, where the British would rule over top of the Indian people to try to exploit things like silk and salt. All right. Okay, so again, pretty basic, pretty straightforward. Again, it's not asking you to tell the entire story of it. It's just saying, can you list it as an example? Can you explain the term? And can you take the marker through it pretty straightforward? All right, so again, make sure you define it, make sure you explain kind of how it relates, and of course, include an example. All right, so then I would do that for each one, and I'd have 1 paragraph, 2 paragraph, 3 paragraph, and I would be done. Okay, there is nothing about the rubric that asks you to put a conclusion on. Okay, so I wouldn't bother at this point. Some of the higher levels, like 20-2 and 30-2, they might have you put a conclusion up, but for right now, don't worry about it. All right, guys, so hopefully that's been extremely helpful for you guys. Hopefully it clarifies things a little bit. And again, with all of these terms, even there's no wrong ones up here. So you can choose whichever ones. We're really looking at how you're explaining it and how you're supporting it. Okay, guys, so I hope that clarifies the assignment, and hopefully you guys have a little bit better understanding, because this is the exact same format that you guys are going to be doing at the 20-2 level and at the 30-2 level. Okay, so make sure you guys follow the directions, watch this video. You can stop it at any time, repeat it, go back and look at it. What I would suggest too is you guys write your assignment, then come back and watch this video, and then go back and look at your assignment, and then you can see, okay, did I leave anything out? Did I explain things well enough? Have a look at the rubric, and that should all help you ace this assignment. All right, guys, so that's the end of this tutorial, and I'm looking forward to reading what some of your responses are going to be. Thanks, guys. Bye.